This is A Geek Leader. Hello and welcome to episode 180 of A Geek Leader Podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and this episode is brought to you by Private Internet Access. Now, if you don't use private internet access when you're surfing the web, let's say you're traveling or something like that, or you're out of your house, then you're probably not surfing the web securely. I've been using private internet access for over 3 years, and I love the service. I was at a security conference several years ago, back before COVID, and I connected to the hotel Wi-Fi, and immediately my endpoint protection started pinging me that I was having hacking attempts, someone was trying to connect to, was scanning my ports, and all this good stuff. So I launched private internet access, and once I did that, the threats just stopped. One of the cool things about private internet access is you can choose VPNs from different locations. So you can test whenever you make changes to see whether DNS is replicated. You can test what it looks like from different sites. You can test latency from different locations all around the world, all around the United States, and in many, many, many other countries. It's a very cool tool, and you can get your copy of, or your license or your account for private internet access for $3.33 a month. That's right, $3.33 a month by going to ageekleader.com/VPN. Again, that's ageekleader.com/VPN. All right, Geek Leaders, today on the show, I've got best-selling author of the book Essentialism, Greg McKeown. And I read this book a while back, and I think it was probably 4 or 5 years ago, and it made a huge impact in my life, and I'm sure it will for your lives as well. Greg, welcome to the show.
So great to be with you. Thank you.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about kind of what you're doing today, how you got into writing in general, but especially this book, Essentialism, and why that made such a big impact in your life.
I've spent 20 years studying why it is that otherwise successful people and teams don't break through to the next level. But it wasn't until I had a personal experience that I realized it really isn't a business question, it's a human question. The personal experience was I got an email from my manager at the time who said, look, Friday between 1 and 2 would be a bad time for your wife to have a baby because I need you to be at this client meeting. And, I'm sure that there was some jest in what they were saying, but we went into the hospital Thursday evening, and our daughter was born in the early hours of Friday morning. And so Friday, instead of focusing explicitly and just enjoying what was clearly the most important thing that day, I felt torn. How can I keep everybody happy? Mm-hmm. How can I, I just tried to straddle it, really. I tried to just do it all. And so to my shame, I went to the meeting. And afterwards, even then, my manager said, look, the client will respect you for the choice you just made. And I'm not sure the look on their faces evinced that sort of confidence, that sort of respect. And even if they had, it is clear in any sort of hindsight that I made a fool's bargain. And what I learned from that personally was if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. Mm. And really, that's what gave me fire for the deed to write Essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of less. And I have found both in the research for that and the writing of it and in the time since that I'm not alone, that many people listening to this will feel busy but not productive, stretched too thin at work and at home, and feeling like their day is just perpetually hijacked by other people's agenda for them. Essentialism is the way out if people feel that.
Yeah, I think I know when I first read this, I was managing a web and mobile development team, and the company I was at the time, we had meetings that were kind of booked for me all the time. And I read this book and I said, what is the most important thing that I'm supposed to be doing? And how can I eliminate the things that I'm not? And I think one thing you talked about in your book was making time to think. And that if you don't have time to think, how can you have time to do anything? And I started blocking off a couple hour blocks 2 days a week on my calendar to make time to think. And that made such an impact on not just me, but my entire team. because we were able to identify kind of like the more important things. And instead of just working on every request that came in, I had time to mentally prioritize what is our most important thing, what is the outcome, and how do we get there? And it made such a huge impact. How have you seen in the countless people that you've talked to about this stuff, making time to think be an impact in their lives?
Well, I think you got the right first step towards living as an essentialist, leading as an essentialist, which is creating space to think, to dream, even to relax and to play. All of that is a necessary prerequisite for being able to have breakthrough insights, to be able to act upon your life instead of it just always acting upon you. And so if you want to make a higher contribution, it is totally necessary to create that space. And if you don't, then you'll get pulled into a reactive cycle that begets itself. So the more meetings you have on your calendar, the more meetings you'll have on your calendar. Because you won't have any space to even wonder, should it even be on here? Should I even be doing it? And you won't have the space to be able to figure out, well, are we even focused on the right things in those meetings? You'll just be in them and reacting to other people who are also living reactively, potentially real non-essentialists who are highly motivated, but they aren't being discerning because they're not creating space to think. And so the cycle continues. I myself just finished up actually a new book just a few weeks ago.
Oh, yeah?
And there's no real announcements on it yet, but it will be out in April 2021. And it was tempting right after that to just jump back in. I'd been in somewhat of monk mode. So that means lots of things I was pushing off. And it was tempting as soon as it was over to say, okay, right, well, let me get back. Let's get to the email backlog. Let's get to all sorts of other projects that I'm interested in, excited about. And my wife, Anna, suggested, look, maybe you ought to take a couple of weeks really and just think. Let's talk, let's dream, let's plan, let's rest, maybe that might be necessary. And so the way I approached it is I just went through my calendar for the next 2 or 3 weeks and I blocked off every single window that wasn't already committed. That was the first thing. And I think anyone listening to it can do that as a first step. Just block off, even if it is only an hour here or an hour there, but you block it right now. Protect at least that. The second thing I did is I went through and I did say, look, are there any of these meetings that are optional right now? Are there any of them that can be negotiated to do it a little later or even not do it at all? And I tell you, I mean, I've been an aspiring essentialist and I've worked as an essentialist in various ways for years now, but it was like rediscovering essentialism. I felt like I'm getting my life back. And in that space that you find on your calendar, you can recuperate, you can think, you can plan, I would describe it this way, is that you can hold each new request in your hands and weigh it. Where you say, look, this is interesting, this is a good request, but is this the right thing for me to be doing right now? Is this the best thing for me to be doing? And to put items on carefully, curate them thoughtfully, is a different way of living. And I have not the slightest desire to go back to how it was before. So I personally have renewed conviction of this essentialist approach to living and leading.
So let's take a step back for any listeners that have not read your book. And can you describe what is an essentialist to someone who's never heard of this term and this is all new to them?
An essentialist is someone who explores what is essential. That's what we've been emphasizing so far. They create space to explore. They create space to think and plan and so on. Number two, an essentialist is someone who eliminates the non-essential. So they're not just prioritizing and then trying to shove everything in anyway. They're actually trying to remove from their lives or reduce, where you can't remove entirely, reduce the activities that are less essential. And then the third thing an essentialist does is they build systems in their lives that make it easy to do what matters most. So it's not just a willpower game. It's that you build a system that itself creates disciplined action, but the system is doing it for you, so that you aren't just focused on what is essential when you happen to remember that thing that matters. Those three things are a cycle. So it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process. It's a daily process. Explore what matters, eliminate what doesn't, and build systems to make it easier to do today and tomorrow. That's what an essentialist is.
So I've started to apply this, not just at work, but also at home, because I think it's an important thing to think about, like, what is the most important thing that you should be doing? And for me, it was always like spending time with my children, right? And my family, my wife, and making sure that I prioritize that time, because early in my career, and this happens to a lot of people in tech and probably a lot of people everywhere, but you get caught up in the idea of, oh, I have to work tonight because I have to do this deployment, or there's a bug in the code. I really want to fix this. So I'm just going to spend an extra hour or two working. And, I have the rest of my life to spend with my family. That's, at least that's what we think. And that's what we tell ourselves. And that's the excuse. How have you seen maybe essentialism taken outside of work to the home life? And how have you seen some impacts or some changes there?
Well, I just got I got an email recently from a woman, Jo, in the UK, and she'd read Essentialism, and the story she shared was so touching to me. I actually had her on the Essentialism podcast, and got to really dig into it a bit deeper. So this is what happened for her. After reading the book, she started asking one question every morning: what is most important today? That's really the first question, right? It's, exploring what is essential. So that was her question. She put it up. I think she, where she can see that question, she's going through it every day. She said at first that the question was always something to do with work. So she's prioritizing her work. And that too is valuable. But she said over time, she started prioritizing, the priority for the day might be something for self-care, might be something for rejuvenation, something like that would become the priority. One day she got a call from her father that said, look, your mother's in the hospital, again, we don't think it's that serious. And she said, well, look, do you want me to drop everything and come to the hospital? He said, oh, no, of course not. It's you've got so much on your plate. There's no need for this. But she said that she remembers exactly where she was, what the weather was like outside, everything sort of slightly slow motion. She can recall it all. That she knew the most important thing she could do that day was to go to the hospital. And so she does. That's a 2-hour drive to the hospital. So it's not just 10 minutes away. She drives to 2 hours there. She goes to see her mother. She's able to say to her mother, look, I love you. I'm sure everything's going to be fine. Her mother said, look, I love you too. I'm not so sure everything's going to be fine. Well, within an hour of that, unfortunately, she'd slipped into a coma. And a week later, they switched off the machines. That was it. She told me, if I was not an aspiring essentialist, I would have missed that. And yet this was really vital to me. And it's actually gone further even than that. As we talked on the podcast, she describes how even the mourning process that followed, the grieving process, she said it was tempting for people to say, well, it's been a few weeks, get on with it, get back, just do what you were doing before. And she said, I want to make the trade-off. Essentialist is aware of the trade-offs they're making, what they're saying. Every time they say yes, they're saying no to something else. She wanted to say yes to grieving. She wanted to be able to experience that and to feel that and to allow that process. She said she almost wished it could have been like Victorian era where you dressed in black so that you signal to people, this is the priority right now. And I can't just pretend to be okay just because everybody wants me to jump back into whatever it is that's on their agenda. And so to me, that was quite a profound story about somebody who is learning over time their own sense of prioritization and feel, I think, empowered to pursue what matters most. And I think that the value proposition of essentialism is basically that you can, if you'll do this, if you'll be more thoughtful, if you'll be more selective, if you'll be more discerning, that you actually end up with a better personal life, but also can make a higher contribution professionally. And that's the paradox of it, is that if you get the order wrong, you can end up losing both. But if you get the order right, you can end up winning in both.
I think that's super powerful when you say that. And, and I've experienced that on a smaller scale. I know when I was putting in a ton of hours and, always at the office, probably destroying, being a bad dad, not doing a great job at being a good husband either. I also wasn't doing a very good job as being a good manager and leader because I wasn't focusing on the important things. And when I made a clear point it was right when my second child was born. I went to my boss and said, look, I'm going to leave the office at 5:30 at the latest, unless there's, an absolute emergency. When I get home, I'm not going to check email on my phone or I'm not going to open my computer. I'm not going to do a thing until at the earliest my kids go to bed. And I can spend at least 30 minutes, with my wife afterwards. And then I'll check email. Then I'll start working if I need to. But I'm just laying that out. And he was just like, well, we'll see how that goes. And what I noticed is my mind shift changes. I shifted in this mindset to where I had to focus on the important things. And it was no longer that I was just doing busy work, but I was doing important work. And my productivity actually got significantly greater in the less hours that I spent at work than I had before.
Well, that seems so consistent with what I found. Just even recently, there's a company that had everybody in the company read Essentialism as preparatory work, like preparing their minds and hearts for an experiment. And the experiment was to move to a 4-day work week. And they what the goal was, it's important, it's not to cram 5 days of work into a 4-day calendar. So you're not saying work 40 hours in 4 days so that you can pretend to have an extra day off, but you really are trying to create the same value in 32 hours of work as you did in 40. And that way you have this extra day, you literally have a one full extra day, a 3-day weekend to be able to balance life more. And they're in the I think they're headquartered. I'm not sure, but I think they're headquartered in Silicon Valley. But they're certainly their partners. Facebook's one of their partners, and they have other tech partners in the work that they're doing. And I mean, the short of it is that I think the company is called Uncharted, and the short of it is that they went through a full experiment. They had a company working with them to actually do assessments so that they got full data. So it wasn't just anecdotally whether they were, doing as much or not, creating as much value or not, and so on. And so as they came out of it, they have found that it is that they have produced the same amount of value. So they still pay people for 40 hours of work, even though they work 32 hours. Their partners have communicated no loss in quality, no loss in output. And so they've made this permanent now. So this is now their company has a 4-day work week. I think that illustrates, it's one illustration of how essentialism can be used in the organizational setting. The idea that the only way to improve output is to put more hours in, I think is, from an engineering point of view, a quite a shallow reading, a shallow level of thinking. That's it. That's all you can do. That's the only increment you think you can change. That's your only lever. More hours versus less hours. To me, it's a little ludicrous. You start to find, well, what if you could improve the quality of people's thinking? What's the lever involved there? If you have people who are routinely tired and burned out, what is the quality of the output you would expect from someone who is physiologically, psychologically at a level of basically being drunk because of how tired they are? Well, what do we expect that somebody will produce? And yet, even when people find themselves in that situation, the answer often seems to be work harder,
Mm-hmm.
work longer, do more, go in more different directions. I mean, the problem is that when people are exhausted, they're very poor judges of being exhausted. And so it begets itself. Non-essentialism begets itself. There is a far better way, and Uncharted happens to be an example of that.
And you talk in your book about the importance of sleep. And for me, I don't think I really understood the importance of sleep until I had kids.
Right.
And lost some of that, ability to sleep for a period of time when they were younger. And I understood the importance of it then, because I would do stupid stuff. And we especially in technology, because, especially if you're on the infrastructure side, you have updates and you have to do those updates after hours. And, sometimes there's the expectation that, you're going to be, starting your updates at midnight, but we expect you back in the office at 8. And that just seems ridiculous to me. What studies have you seen that kind of reemphasize what you're talking about when it comes to sleep?
Well, I mean, Anders Ericsson's study on this is is pretty powerful stuff. He found that he was, studying the top performers and found that the top performers do spend more hours in their particular expertise than average performers. That was the number one distinction. This is where Malcolm Gladwell popularized Ericsson's research when he talked of the 10,000 hour rule. So over a period of years, if you're more focused on a single thing, then you tend to make more progress than if you're more scattered in your attention. So that's quite an essentialist insight on its own. But it's the number two most correlated item that he found that I think reinforces the essentialist way of living. What he found was that the highest performers sleep more than the average performers. Well, that's totally counterintuitive in a world that tries to emphasize hustle culture and 24/7 work ethic and just put in the longer hours and force it and make it happen. What he found is that the top performers sleep on average about 8.4 hours in every 24-hour period, which means they both sleep more and also nap more. And the logic is quite simple to unpack, which is that if you're rested, you make more of the hours you put into your focused endeavor. So we all know this, that we've all been staring at a screen for hours, and you just sense we're just not really breaking through. We've reached a point of sort of exhaustion, and we keep pushing and pushing, but for every hour we put in, we're getting less out. It's diminishing returns, or maybe even we get to a point of negative returns where every hour you put in of work, you're getting less out than if you hadn't spent the hour. And so this is reinforced. Ericsson's study supports this, and lots of other research too. In fact, there's not really much research to support the alternative. Right. It's just become a dominant assumption that's infiltrated our culture, and I think it just infiltrated it because of the Industrial Revolution, which did successfully increase productivity by 50 times by increasing by bringing the factory system into play. That's powerful, disruptive, transformational in the world economy, and no question. But when we're not careful, when we make big strides in one area, we can overemphasize something, overlearn a thing to the point that we've actually lost something. And in this case, I think that we learned that if you can increase efficiency and you can get a machine to be on 24/7, then you can increase your throughput. There is some truth to that. But it doesn't work for humans. So humans are not a machine. They deal with rhythms. They can have insights. The best software engineer, the best programmer. They're not 10% better than the average. They're not 50% better. The former CIO of Microsoft actually said he doesn't think it's 10x or 100x or 1,000x. He says he thinks it's 10,000x better. The best software engineer versus someone who's average. So using his perhaps hyperbole, but I interviewed him and asked him about it, and he said he still absolutely stands by it. He believes it literally, not just metaphorically.
I would stand by that too. Absolutely.
Well, if that's true, then what we need to optimize for is not an hour extra of time, but what are the conditions necessary to allow someone to produce 10x, 100x, 1000x, 10,000x insight? And as soon as you frame it that way, you realize what a fool's bargain it is to try and get people to sleep less and work more. You want your top performers to be at peak performance, and they cannot be over anything like a long period of time if they aren't resting, sleeping, rejuvenating, and playing, and relaxing, and creating space, uninterrupted space, mostly in the mornings, to do value creation. That's the kind of creation you would want if you wanted to optimize the human potential versus a factory potential.
Yeah, I think one thing we got to think about. As humans, we need the rest to fix the damage that we've done to our body. Fix the cells that are being just torn apart on a daily basis. And when you talk about the developers, when I managed the mobile and web development team at that company I was talking about earlier, we hired a developer in, and it was kind of like a strange hire for me, because usually we have this requirements of we have to have a 4-year degree in computer science and all these things. And someone referred a guy to me who was a younger individual who dropped out of high school, got his GED, and was writing code with his dad. And I was very even hesitant to interview him, but I really respected the person that said, "Hey, you really should talk to this guy." So I interviewed him, and he blew me away. I brought him in, and we hired him as a .NET developer, which is a certain framework using a C# language. And I didn't have any real work for him at the time yet, because we were getting ready to start a project, but it hadn't quite kicked off yet. And I had some work in Java, though, which was a language that he said he wasn't that proficient at, but he knew a little bit about it. And I said, okay, well, here's a project we have here. And I didn't tell him this, but one of our senior Java developers had mentioned that it would probably take about 2 to 3 weeks for him to work on it. So I gave it to this young individual who's not a Java expert, but he was a superstar programmer. And he took it and completed the task within 4 hours. And it's just one of those things that there's certain people that just see the algorithms and see the code in a different way than other people. And when he says, 10,000x, I totally see that 100%.
That's really the justification for an essentialist approach to living and leading is recognizing that effort and results are not linearly related, and so it changes the leadership math involved. We move into new math, and you start to say, okay, what we need to do is recognize, let's say it this way, that we're not in a coal mine where we're just trying to take as much coal from point A to point B. It's not just an efficiency game. It's like discovering that we're in a diamond mine. As a leader, your job is to help find what the diamonds are. And that can be a few different things. I mean, that means what are the most important objectives for this quarter? Not just how much stuff are we going to do, but what if we could only get one thing done this quarter in our team, what would it be? That's like looking for a diamond, but that's just your goal setting. You could also say, what are our diamond periods of working in the day? And that, as we've already mentioned, turned out to be the morning hours. So how can you create concentrated work cycles so we don't have meetings on 3 days of the week from 9 till noon, no meetings. It's just quiet, centered working. It's also, you could also have this diamond test for who you hire. You could be very unselective, broad in your criteria when you come to hires. You could simply say, well, there's a job to be, I need someone to fill that position, and we're just throwing somebody in there. We could hire fast and fire slow, which tends to create quite a bloated organization, or at least an inefficient one, because you just not got the right people in the right positions. So the essentialist way, the diamond approach, would be to say, look, I'd prefer to have a person short and wait for the right person, and have a robust process for selecting them, actually getting the right person is exceedingly valuable. Every decision they make will be more optimized because you had the right person in place. So your one decision equals 1,000 decisions down the road because you were careful and selective. Warren Buffett talks about he has three principles he looks for. I call it just the 3 I's to keep it, clear. They are integrity, intelligence, and initiative. You can really think carefully about someone on your team, right? A software engineer. Do they have integrity? If they don't have integrity, the other two don't matter. Or even they do matter, but they can be even worse. So integrity is number one. But do they have the raw intelligence? Have you hired the brightest and smartest people that you can? And then finally, initiative. Are they going to show initiative themselves? Are they going to wait constantly to be told what to do? You want to be able to hire for those three. And if you do that, what you do is then you can't then hire those people and then micromanage them. No, you hire the right people, and you hire highly trustworthy people, says Buffett, and you trust them completely. That's the right combination, so that you are all about creating the environment for them to be able to do this breakthrough, exceptionally valuable work. You're trying as a manager not to tell them what to do, but to remove boundaries, remove noise and obstacles, remove those meetings perhaps in the morning, and making sure you run meetings that also are highly purposeful and are holding people accountable to the most important work. This changes the job of the leader from a pusher and interrupting people's schedule to protecting it and enabling them to do their very best work.
So is this something that everybody can do? Like, can everybody be an essentialist leader?
Yes, I think the answer is yes, but I think you've got to acknowledge a few things right up front. And the first thing you've got to acknowledge is that this is really countercultural in a lot of organizations. So let me tell you how I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't just read Essentialism and then just get into execution yourself individually in a work environment, because people won't know what you've done and they won't know why you've done it. They're speaking a different language. They're speaking non-essentialism. They don't know that because it's so ubiquitous. It's so cultural. It's like fish discovering water last. Everyone's speaking non-essentialism. They don't even need to call it a language because it's just what everyone's speaking. You suddenly turn up and you're speaking essentialist, you're speaking essentialism, you're going to just not be understood. So your first action, maybe after reading the book, is not to implement, but to get other people to read. You got to teach the language. You just literally even having a book club. That's where I've seen this done successfully, is that the leader involved gets everyone on their team to read it, maybe everyone in their peer group if possible, every internal customers even. I mean, the broader you can go, the easier the conversation is. If you want to have a conversation in French, the more people you can have learning French, the better. So with essentialism, that's step 2. Get everybody speaking the language. Then you have already, even in that act, changed culture. Even while the behavior lags, the culture is changed, because I think culture is primarily what we can and cannot talk about. And once people have the language of essentialism installed, they can, they've upgraded the language. You can now talk about stuff that you just didn't even know you could before. Now you can say, well, what is the priority? I know all these 25 things are good, but they can't all be the priority. We all understand that now. So what is the priority this quarter? If we could only deliver one thing that would add the most value to our priority customer, what would that be? And that question alone is such a game changer. It can significantly shift the output. I have a president of an organization that followed the pattern I just described, got into it himself, became an essentialist, got the whole company that he was responsible, the department that he was responsible, into it. They increased their profitability by 4x over a year, while reducing the number of products that they were releasing. I think they cut that in half, but if it was more, it may have been more than half. I think it might have been cut it to a quarter of what they were doing before. That's another illustration of the power of it. That if you want to massively increase, quantum increase in output and productivity, you don't just push people harder. You don't just put more hours in. You don't just do more stuff in more directions. You get more selective and you teach everybody involved how to become more selective and thoughtful. And this can produce exceedingly high your breakthroughs at the team level.
So less but better.
Less but better. But empower everybody to start talking about that and thinking about it. There's such low-hanging fruit in that area.
It's 100% right. I know when I first started implementing this stuff, probably back in 2016 or 17, maybe it was before. It was right around that time. I had my team go back and everybody look at their calendars and see what they can cut out. And what meetings do you go to that you don't provide input and you don't really get a whole lot out of? Let's stop that. What features do we have on our website? We manage e-commerce websites, and what features do we have that people don't use? Let's put analytics behind them and figure out what people aren't using, and let's just get rid of them. Let's not keep updating them and keep maintaining those features that people aren't using. Let's cut them out. Let's stop them. And and when I tell that to my boss at the time, I remember he was saying, "Why would we ever want to remove features?" I was like, "Well, because we have to update them. We have to maintain these things. It's just taking time, and nobody's using them. It's clutter. We got to get rid of it."
It costs something in time, in resources, attention, both for you internally and for the end user. It costs them something too. Clutter has a cost to it for everybody involved. The question he asks it illustrates the dominant assumption of non-essentialism, which is that more must be better. More features must be better. That is so clearly not the case, and especially true in a world that's growing more complex in every direction. It's super important to understand that, is that people are already inundated with options. They're inundated with features from all your competitors and everything, all the social media they partake in and everything. Your job is to make it as simple and easy as possible to do the most important things that you're providing. Otherwise, you're not going to stand out. You're going to make it harder for your customers to do what they really want to be able to do with you. And the only reason you want to make it harder for them to do what matters most is if you hate your customers.
Yeah, if you think back of it, I mean, from a technology perspective, look at the companies that have succeeded. Google was the most simple search engine. Twitter was the most simple way to share a piece of information. You had 140 characters, you put it in there and you're done. Right. And that's what the customers wanted. And that made life so much easier.
Well, and we don't have to stop there. I mean, you can, the most valuable company in the world, almost certainly the company that will be at $2 trillion valuation is Apple. Now we could certainly quib about how simple they are and where they've perhaps gone for complex solutions still. I mean, you can always push and say, oh, somebody could go even further. But nevertheless, it is a deep part of the DNA culture of Apple to pursue less but better. And that is still true in the decision making. Whereas even after Steve Jobs passed away, they could have done hundreds of different projects. They still have this sitting on an enormous cash reserve. They could do, they could literally do 1,000 things they're not doing currently. Why aren't they doing those things? It's because of this cultural bias for less but better. And that applies to, as we've discussed, it applies to how you would hire. It applies to, let's go back to Steve Jobs' classic. First of all, when he returns to Apple, it's almost dying. They have 330 products. He reduces that, and he and the team he puts together reduce it to 10 products. Talk about, why would we get rid of any features? Why would we get rid of any products? Why would we get rid of products that may be even, in fact, technically profitable? Wouldn't we just keep them going, keep them all going? No, he says that's not the way you're going to create the future. That's going to how you're going to suffocate your organization. But it happened not just in that product simplification process, but also within the products when they were creating the iDVD, what became known as iDVD, the DVD burning software that became standard on Macs. On the iMacs. I talked to the lead engineer on that project, and if you care to hear it, I'll share the backstory. Absolutely. He had come from DVD burning within the high-end DVD burning machines, industry. So this was he and the team he was on were producing. They thought absolutely. I mean, they typically it maybe cost $50,000 for industry-specific DVD burning machine at that time. And what they were doing is they thought there was a way to be able to create a machine, or at least the software that would act as if it was that machine for maybe $5,000. And so they thought they were making significant progress, and they were. I mean, it's a 10x reduction. It makes it, of course, much more available for other people. Mm-hmm. Their company is purchased by Apple, and they're given the task of, well, no, you've got to now make this possible to go standard on our higher end machines. And so this is a machine that as a whole is a $5,000 machine at that time. So what do you do? Well, their manual is a 5,000 page manual. So their job is to try and simplify it. And so they start working on this project. They're very excited. They know what they're trying to do. They've got to try and make this more available, start to reduce, all the different, I'm just looking for the right word, but all the additional features that they had added. They're trying to say, well, which one can I remove? And they keep removing them. And they feel pretty proud of themselves. They've worked on this, if I remember right, for several weeks now. And then they have the meeting with Steve. They're all there together in the conference room. He described it in detail to me. Steve comes in. He's late as he comes in. And once everyone's ready, he comes in and he's listening for a while. He's asking a few questions. They've got a deck in front of them. They want to show, the progress and how minimalist they've been able to make all of this. But their mindset is they're going from this complex system and they're trying to make it simpler. Steve comes at it from the opposite end. He starts at zero. He says, look, how do you do it in one step? How do you do it in two steps? Forget your, 5,000 page manual, whatever it was. How do you do it And so he said, after he listened for a while, he draws it up on the thing. And this is the part most people have, that know the story, know about it. He draws it up on a whiteboard. He goes here. This is where you drag it from over to this button where it says burn and you click it. That's the app we're going to build. And They couldn't believe it. They never went through their full deck with him. And in a way, they couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it, this engineer, because he's like, we had made so much progress, but our orientation was opposite. We were going from complexity to simplicity, and he was starting at total simplicity, at zero. And his basic question was, how can we make this easy for the user? That's different than how do we make something complex less complex. And I think there's something quite profound in that story for engineers on any product. And if that's true, then I think it's in some ways it's truer now. There's so much optionality. There's so much software. There's so much SaaS out there. There's so many places I can go. Part of what's going to distinguish people in the future is how simple you can make it, how easy you can make it. For anybody who's inundated with the ever-changing functionality that they're receiving, all in the name of improvement, but some of it's just overwhelming. It just actually makes your life harder. Somebody who can figure out how to make it easy for their end user, I think, is someone who can create a lot more value.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what you see Tesla doing with the cars, right? They're just making it infinitely easier.
Well, I think that is right, and they're working hard to make it easier for the end user, to make it work. I just watched a video this morning I hadn't seen. I've watched quite a few of the videos out there on Musk talking about first principles and so on. But this is about he's talking about the machine that makes the machine.
Mm.
And he's talking about the factory, and he's talking about using first principles on the factory itself, and how it's really quite brilliant. But it's just saying, if you just go back to the very basics of what a factory is and what you'd be testing it against, you find that there really are some enormous opportunities. He thinks, without exaggeration, but perhaps a 10x improvement possibility. And he said, if you treat the factory as a product, as a computer, and you say, look, how would we optimize this if we rethought about it? Not just, hey, the product is the thing that comes out at the end, but the machine that builds the machine is your first product. And he says, as soon as you get computer engineers to think about that, they've been optimizing for these tiny improvements, on the chip or on the software that you're running. But once you get them to think about the machine behind the machine, they can quite quickly see that the boundaries they thought were there are not really there. You don't have to do it the way it was done in the past. It's just an illustration of what we're saying. We're just extrapolating it further to say, look, this type of thinking, where you stop saying, how can I do what we're currently doing more efficiently, right? Because that's traditional productivity. And instead you say, how can we do the right things? Yeah. Essentialism isn't about doing more things. It's about doing more of the right things. That requires thinking differently, creating space to explore, eliminate the ways you've been doing it in the past, the stuff that isn't actually helping anymore, isn't serving anymore, and then creating systems that make it easy to continue to do those things that you've identified as being essential.
That's awesome. I really appreciate having you on the show, Greg. It's been just a great conversation. I feel like I'm reinvigorated and excited to go back, and I'm going to read the book again, just because I think it's important for me to look at the principles that maybe I haven't implemented and see what I can go back to do that. And I really like the idea of not just coming into your group or your team and talking as an essentialist, but get them on board too, so that you're all speaking the same language. And the idea of a book club, or having a small group to get together and, go through this together, I think is an extremely important thing that really isn't that hard to do and would be super easy, with Zoom and the other technologies that we have today, just to, hey, once a week, let's get together and let's talk about how we're going to apply this particular chapter in our company and our team.
I had the way I came across that video with Musk and the machine behind the machine was a reader of Essentialism who emailed me to say that they have read Essentialism. This is like, I think even this morning is when I got that email, 30 times. And so I don't know even what to make of that, but I think what first occurs to me is that there are levels within levels, sort of Inception type style, that there are so many layers that you can apply this thinking to. And as you strip away this industrial age non-essentialism, the potential is enormous. Peter Drucker laid down the gauntlet many years ago now, observing, as I mentioned previously, that the industrial age increased the productivity of the manual laborer by 50x over the agrarian age we'd lived in previously. I buy that. Actually, it's not about buying it. The data is really clear about that. Mm-hmm. Now, the question is, he says, the challenge of the information age is to increase the knowledge workers' productivity by 50x. And I love that he made that observation. That has been quoted far and wide, but we haven't achieved it yet. Well, why haven't we? And I think a primary reason for it is that we're still treating humans like factories. What you need to do in order to make your factories become like, 50x again, is you have to release your knowledge workers to be able to think, discern, improve, reflect, rejuvenate, relax. This is how humans thrive, So you've got to allow them to work at their optimal level if you want them to be able to create significant breakthroughs in the rest of your system.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a quote by Tim Ferriss that I'm reminded of when we're having this conversation. It was, busyness is another form of laziness. And,
yeah, that's interesting. I like it.
We have that where people just, instead of taking the time to think about what is the most important and what is the right thing to do, it's easier sometimes just to be busy doing all the wrong things.
Well, it's just easy, at least on the surface,
right?
To just, I got to think about the word easier.
Maybe it's easier at the moment.
It's more. I've got to find the right word for it. It's more normal, but I don't know that it has to be.
How about
easier.
Comfortable? Maybe more comfortable.
It's just what is currently. Mm-hmm. That you get up in the morning. We're well trained. The system has been built. Yes, I will say it that way. I suppose in that sense it's easier, but the system has been built. That means we check email first thing in the morning because our phone is next to our bed. And yes, we use it as our alarm, but we also then just get pulled into all this noise before anything else has happened. So a system has been built at enormous cost. Think about the investment that's been made in the average smartphone and all the systems around it, the Wi-Fi systems in your home, the cellular systems, the towers. I mean, it's not been it's not really easy to do those things. Mm-hmm. It's just those have all been built and we're operating as if they're unquestioned, as if they are, So what I'm advocating is that we build a different system for ourselves that makes it. I mean, let's take something very tangible. You just get your phone out of your bedroom. It has no business being in there. You use an analog phone to wake up. I mean, not phone, analog clock to wake up. You don't need to use an alarm on your phone. You don't need to be on your phone the last hour at night. Put it to bed before you go to bed. Take control of your life. Take back control from these norms and systems that have been built to make certain companies exceedingly wealthy. I mean, that's why they've been built this way. They have not been built to optimize our thinking, our space, our creativity, our ingenuity. They are the people that have built these systems are incentivized for their benefit to make these tools addictive and ever present in our lives.
Yeah, there's a new documentary, The Social Dilemma. Have you seen that on Netflix?
I haven't seen it yet, but I've seen the trailer for it, and of course, yes. I'm sure I will see it.
It's saying exactly what you're saying right now, that the tools were built to, and it's not like it's intentional, but it's just a way that we're designed to, steal attention, right? And that's where the marketing dollars are, is attention. And if we can get people to stay on their phone and to stay in this ecosystem of attention, then we get more revenue. And that's kind of the mindset. One of the more practical things that I've done after reading your book was to not check email in the morning at all. I want to get in, I want to look at my to-do list. I'm going to get some things done before I let the train wreck of email knock it off its tracks.
How have you done with that? I mean, give me like are you doing that still? Did you do it for just a little period? I'm so curious about that.
I don't open up Outlook at all. Now I'll still get sidetracked sometimes with Teams or Slack or whatever, but I won't open up Outlook until roughly 10 o'clock. And I'll make sure that I've done one or two things off my to-do list. Like, because a lot of times my to-do list is really simple things, like make a call, make an uncomfortable call that I don't want to do, right? Or spend some time reading over some documentation that's important to my team. So I'll do that before because once I get on, open up Outlook and I see someone asking me a question, I want to go and start responding to those things. And I'm going to forget about the simple things that I really should have done. And got it off my list. So I don't open up Outlook till at least 10 o'clock.
I mean, I just think it's fantastic that you have achieved it. I've been inspired by so many essentialists who implement practices of essentialism, and then inspire me, back. One of them is Ben Bergeron, who's another one of the interviews on the Essentialism podcast, and one of the things he did, this was pre-COVID, is that he said, okay, I want to be home by 6:00 at night because my family is more important to me than the businesses I run. So I want to have a set time. And so 6:00 is I actually want to be walking through the door. That means it takes me half an hour to drive home. I need to be packing up in any meeting I'm in at 5:25 so that I'm, getting in my car at 5:30. And so literally whatever meeting he's in, he just starts packing up. No matter what the conversation is, he's just packing up at 5:25. So he's walking out the door at 5:30. I asked him, and he built a Google spreadsheet for this, where he has his values in the first column. He has metrics in the second column. His metric was 5:25. And then every day after that, he's saying, okay, how often am I doing it? He averages 75% of the time over a 3-year period that he was leaving, those meetings at 5:25 and would arrive at 6:00 at home. Hearing that, I thought, well, even in COVID times, especially in COVID times, it can be hard to actually have an end point. People sleep, eat, Zoom, and when's the natural stop? Is it 5? Is it 6? Is it 7? And it just keeps going, and people just can be, attached digitally for more and more of the time. They look at their Fitbit at the end of the day and it's 300 steps, because they didn't even have to get in the car and go anywhere. They're just logged on. And so one of the things I did as a boundary, starting close to the beginning of COVID, was okay, I'm going to walk out of my office and announce my arrival every night, like a town crier. And my goal was 5:00. And so I would go out there, 4:59, it's 5:01, whatever it was. One of the latest I remembered was 5:23, and I didn't shout it as loud, but still, but it gave me an excuse to end. And it again, when you have a boundary, you start to realize, you start to move. You're like, if I want to solve this problem, I must solve it not with more hours. That's the easiest sort of least intelligent way to try and solve a problem. It's always available. Yes, you can always spend another hour, well, within reason. But what if you say, okay, I'm never going to work past 5? It's just the hair has to be on fire for me to do it differently. But I still want to make a higher contribution. I still want to make a 10x contribution, as I literally do in my life. That's true. How would you do it? Well, you start to say, well, you've got to think clearer. You've got to do these other things that I now do, which is I create a lot more space to think. I'm pretty extreme in this, but then I hear that Warren Buffett, when he first meets Bill Gates, looks at his calendar, they shows him his calendar. Bill Gates is at the time, packing his schedule full. He's a CEO of Microsoft. He thinks there's no other way. And then suddenly he meets Warren Buffett, one of the most successful investors in history, has a successful company, all the rest of it. And his calendar for that week had one thing in it, and it was to get his hair cut. Why does he only have one thing on his calendar? That's the thing to get. Is it because he's lazy? Of course not. Is it because he doesn't want to think? Of course not. It's because he wants to maximize the flexibility to focus on whatever he thinks does matter in each given day. He doesn't want it to be determined by other people. He doesn't want his assistant to determine it, perhaps, as can sometimes happen. He wants to take control of his schedule. And he, of course, is quoted as having said the difference between successful people and very successful people is that very successful people say no to almost everything. That's something to grab attention.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. And I think that's a great place for us to wrap up, is to understand that, the most successful people say no. And sometimes that we think that as part of a business, or, to make our customers happy or our bosses happy, we have to say yes to everything. And we have to remember that the most successful people learn to say no.
Just so.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for coming on the show. How can people check out your book and your podcast and find out more about you, and maybe stay in touch whenever your next one comes out?
I think that if people want to get onto the newsletter, It's the 1 Minute Wednesday. In 1 minute, they'll just get, an insight and hopefully useful and in keeping them sharp in these principles, and also introduces the podcast for that week. The podcast drops every Monday. And then just go to essentialism.com. That's where all stuff is happening. But there is an announcement coming there soon that I think will be useful for anyone who is wanting to really make essentialism a part of their life.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, and I'll link that up in the show notes. And again, thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Hope you guys enjoyed the interview, and don't forget about private internet access. You can get your VPN started today for $3.33 a month. Just visit ageekleader.com/VPN. Also, if you enjoyed the show, please leave a rating review in Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to your shows. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you are listening on the Overcast player, click the little hearts and the stars. I'd greatly appreciate it. It helps us grow and get more listeners every day. Again, thanks so much, and have a great week.